Hi, everyone. Welcome back to Bufnagle the podcast, where we explore entertaining and enlightening discussions of the adventure of life and all things good. From science and technology to history and philosophy to leadership and success. We hope to give you a better understanding of the world and skills for everyone to pursue their own adventure. Hi, everybody. Welcome back to Bufnagle the podcast, where we talk about all things good in the pursuit of the adventure of life. I'm Zach, and we got a great show today. I don't want to spoil anything, but it's going to be a ton of fun, a ton of lessons learned, and a ton of education to bring to you guys. So, however, I can't educate you all by myself. So, as always, I'm joined by Rafe. Rafe, how are you doing today?
Hey, Zach, I am fantastic. You say you can't educate him, but you could, because I think most of this is you're going to be educating me. But this should be a great show, and we're going to try to get to it right away. But I have to. I got to do this. I got to thank the listeners, and you guys. I say this every week, but I say it not just to fill time. I say it because you guys matter, and we really appreciate you listening. Because of you guys out there, we, the Bufnagle team, and you are part of that team. We are now a global top 10% podcast. And that's, you know what? You might say, well, it's only top 10%. I was like, you know what? We're better than 90% of them out there. So, hey, thanks to you guys. As usual, you can reach us at bufnagle@bufnagle.com. We're on Twitter, Instagram, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Amazon Music, all sorts of other places. If there's a platform you need us to be on, let us know and we will figure that out. Hey, if you are new to our podcast, okay, I'm talking to you now. All right, welcome. We are glad you are here. We're going to ask you one thing. We're going to ask you to give us 4 episodes, all right? Come back, give us a whirl. It takes a while to get to know the folks here. And, it's like your first day at school. You come in there and maybe you don't know where your locker is. You're not sure if you like the tater tots at lunch. But, at the end of that first week, you're doing all right. So give us 4 episodes, and then we'll give you a reason to come back. And remember, tell a friend to listen, and you will get a free episode. And if you're listening on one of these services, hit that subscribe button. It doesn't cost you anything, but it's really good for you because it gives you a little alert when we have dropped new content, and it will alert you to that, and then you'll be the first on the block to know. All right, we generally drop on Tuesdays, and you will get the alert. So, Zach, that's the news of the day, and get us going, man.
Yeah. So, like I said earlier, we're going to do a lot of educating. We're going to be having a lot more fun as well. Who knew you could learn things and be educated and have fun all at the same time? But we're going to do that today. But I think you got a story to kind of get us started with this.
Absolutely. And a lot of this education, this is generations are interesting things because they, like when I spent time talking to your grandfather, Zach, to my dad, a lot of times we'll watch football together or we'll see something and he'll say something like, well, what was that? He'll see some ad that he doesn't understand the common reference. Or he'll see he'll see some singer person made the news. And I try to describe what that is and explain that. And I'm waiting, Zach, because it will come. The day will come. And I'm not picking on my father here. The day will come when I know it sounds odd. The time will come when I don't get the cultural reference. All right. It will pass me by. It will pass you by. And all you listeners out there, it will pass you by. Someday we'll all be in a box. But hey, for the time being, the young folks are here to help us old guys around. And I was talking to my dad and he came up with this. He said, what are these Ninja Turtle things? And I said, well, there's a cartoon called Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. And he was like, what does that mean? He said, well, they're turtles and they fight like ninjas, like that, that
do ninja things.
Yeah, ninja guys, all right? And they're mutant because obviously regular turtles don't do that, all right? And they're teenagers. So they are Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, and they fight crime, and they do all these things. And they are named after, and I told him the names, right? The names, Leo, Raphael, Mike, and Donnie. And he said, do I know that? I know those names, right? I said, yeah, those are names. They're named after Italian Renaissance artists. And he thought that was great, that there was this relationship between something kind of wacky
Slightly dumb.
Well, but it's a cartoon. It's a modern cartoon, and he thought it was kind of neat that the cartoon actually pointed kids to something that was, I guess, the only term is classical, and he thought that was a great thing to have for kids.
Yeah, it's a 100% a fun thing to have. I'm mentioned on this podcast multiple times before. I'm a huge fan of history, specifically any history before like 1500, and then U.S. history from about 1776 to 1812. But that's a completely different point. I've rambled on before about the ancient civilizations, specifically the Egyptians, the Greeks, and the Romans. And speaking of the Romans, that's where the Renaissance was and where these names of these Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles came from. You had Leonardo, named after Leonardo da Vinci. Raphael, named after Raphael, the famous fresco painter. Donatello, who was named after a sculpture artist named Donatello. And then Michelangelo, who was named after Michelangelo, the same Michelangelo that painted the Sistine Chapel. So there's this huge pop culture thing that also encompasses this huge cultural event that happened in Italy in the 1500s.
Yeah, so I want to just make sure I get so there's some time frames here, and we always like to make sure we tie these historic things together, because we did a lot of stuff with Magellan, and we've talked about Lewis and Clark and some of these other time frame things, and it's important to kind of ground these people in time. So when you're like, to me, time goes left to right. So when I'm looking back to the left. All right, so like now is here, and then I'm looking back, and it was like, oh, Zach was born there, and then it was like I was born there, and then way, way back here, these other guys were born. So from a chronological point of view, Donatello was 1386 to 1466. So you can say like late 1300s, early 1400s. So, and we've talked about that with our exploration stuff. 1450 or so is how you can think about the printing press. All right. So Donatello is the earliest one of these. All right. And Donatello actually was dead before Michelangelo was even born, and Raphael. The second one is Da Vinci. Right. And he was 1452 to 1519. Okay. So keep in mind, 1519, that's when Magellan started his thing. So if you've been following along, so Da Vinci was on his way out when Magellan took off to go around, before his one remaining ship made it all the way around. So 14, yeah, he didn't make it. We know that story. Spoiler alert, right? So Da Vinci was 1450 to 1520 time frame, right? And then comes Michelangelo, 1475 to 1564. So that one, he's a little bit later, right? But keep in mind, Columbus was 1492. All right, so the New World really opens up to the age of exploration about 1500, right? And these guys are bridging that. Da Vinci, 1452 to 1520. Michelangelo, 1475 to 1564, right? And the last but not least is Raphael, who is 1483. So he was like a 10-year-old boy when Columbus was doing his stuff, all right? So that's how old he was. And he died very young. He died in 1520 as well, just like Da Vinci. So Raphael did not make it very long. So that's the order: Donatello, Da Vinci, Michelangelo, and then Raphael.
Yeah. So there's these four fairly famous, fairly well-known Renaissance painters who are named after Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles.
It's the other way around.
Yeah,
right?
It's the other way around. But
yeah.
I like to think of it.
Right.
Time travel is a thing. So who knows?
Well, and they're fairly famous. I mean, these are the guys you need to know. So, and that's a great thing about that cartoon is if it encourages people to look back and to learn this stuff, then hey, we're all in favor of it. Okay, so and I don't know, like Zach, I have to say I have never seen the show, the movie, the comic books, the I'm sure there's a ninja podcast. I haven't done any of those things because that's not my generation. But I do know they're out there. I do know they are Lego sets as well. And there's a lot of stuff to be learned from these guys. And we're going to walk through some of these things, some of these guys, and the things that they did. All right. So
we're going to start with Leonardo da Vinci. Leonardo da Vinci probably is the most famous Renaissance painter. He also might be one of the most famous artists of all time, going beyond his artistical painting talent and into engineering creations and philosophical ideas as well. If you're unaware, Leonardo da Vinci is well known for the Mona Lisa, which is a very, very, very tiny painting that hangs in the Louvre today. He is also the painter of The Last Supper, and he is well known for the Vitruvian Man, which is a geometric description of man's relation to the world.
Yeah. So okay. So okay, it's interesting. You say that the Mona Lisa, and suddenly that picks the things you can talk about. That is a. I think of these conversations as like hallways that have little doors on them. All right, and that Mona Lisa. Some of these conversations, some of these things we talk about, the door is like it's like a broom closet. But other things we talk about, like the Mona Lisa, you open that up, and it is like it's monstrous what you can talk about at that point. I have Zach. I've been to the Louvre. I've seen the Mona Lisa, or at least what they say is the Mona Lisa. There's all sorts of Dan Brown kind of conspiracies about whether that Mona Lisa is the actual Mona Lisa, or did it get switched out, or did Tom Hanks paint it, or whatever it is. Right. So, but the Mona Lisa is a very small painting, and it hangs in the Louvre. And if you go see it, at least back when I saw it, I don't know, 15, 20 years ago, there's a lot of stuff in that room, but there's the other thing that's in the room along with the Mona Lisa is a zillion people, all right, trying to look at the Mona Lisa. And it's up on the wall in this little glass box. And you walk in, you're like, okay, there it is. And that's the famous painting. And it's interesting to me that thing is in the neighborhood of 500 years old. The painting is 500 years old. And there it is. And everybody's seen it. And if you get a chance to go to the Louvre, give yourself more than the 3 hours I saw. There is just, it is nonstop. You should spend a week at the Louvre, I would guess. And then you get to exit through the gift shop, of course, and get yourself a poster. So, but the Mona Lisa is a great painting, and you should see it so you can learn about Da Vinci. Zach, I got a book for Christmas I think it was from your sister and your brother-in-law, about Vitruvian Man, which is that painting that we've all seen of the guy outstretched and like a circle and a square on it. Right?
Yep.
Yeah, and it talks about how Da Vinci came to that drawing, and I believe the conclusion is that that's essentially him. That is him, and there's a lot of discussion in there about that painting being a representation of how medieval man looked at the human body as sort of this, like you said, the microcosm of the universe, right? So everything that's in the universe is reflected in the body, and everything in the body is reflected in the universe. And there's a math thing in that painting or that drawing, whatever it is, that there's a square around the outside, and then there's a circle together. And that was a math problem that was always very difficult for the ancients, was this concept of squaring the circle. So if I give you a circle, can you give me a square that has the same area of that circle? And that's a hard thing to do because there's like pi involved, right? And
pie.
There is.
Hang on, I'm gonna go get some pie real quick. And
yeah, I had forgotten. Sorry, I didn't realize that was the magic word. There's some description. It's a great book. It's by one of my favorite authors, Toby Lester, who wrote The Fourth Part of the World, which should be mandatory reading for every scholar of antiquity and maps. But Toby Lester wrote Fourth Part of the World, and it's a great book, and I'm sure it's on very inexpensive prices now on Amazon or wherever you want to get your books.
Yeah. Speaking of that as well, with this drawing, this piece of art, it is a piece of art in its own unique way. Leonardo was also very invested into engineering and inventions. And he had this fascination with flight, specifically around like creating a flying machine for mankind. And there's plenty of Leonardo da Vinci notes that depict flying machines in early stages before the Wright brothers flew in North Carolina. There were these ideas of creating a perpetual motion machine. Leonardo da Vinci was fascinated by science, despite the fact that he was also a famous artist. This man was the definition of a Renaissance man in its truest sense of the word. Of he was so uniquely gifted in art, but he was also wanted to fulfill and find joy and find light and goodness in other parts of the world, specifically with that engineering, that invention. his exploration into anatomy and physiology and those type of things as well. Leonardo was such a complete essence of what the Renaissance was. I can talk more about Renaissance being unaptly named, but that's a story for a different day.
Yeah, that's there. There's a number. I was thinking when you were saying that. I hope Zach mentions his study of anatomy because the history of anatomy up to that point was very weak. It was difficult to dissect the human body. That was a difficult thing to do from a moral point of view. They said so. It was. He actually did that, and he drew what he saw inside, and his drawings are phenomenal, as you can imagine from his paintings. He provided really strong representations of the true nature of how man looked. The ripples in your skin and the motion of the muscles and the location of these curvatures in the bone. He was all over that. I want to, and there's a lot of that in the Vitruvian Man book by Toby Lester. It's a whole book about Da Vinci and how he got to Vitruvian Man. But so I'll endorse it again.
Yeah, I mean, I can say this all day about Leonardo da Vinci. He was the true Renaissance man, and I think that's why we start this conversation with Leonardo da Vinci. Beyond the Last Supper, beyond the Vitruvian Man, and beyond the Mona Lisa, this man solidified and did things that affected the human creation spirit. I could talk about engineering, invention, flight, all of those fascinations for many, many, many years to come, and still to this day.
Yeah, so and I'm sure you've all seen these pencil sketches of these. Like he had a big flying machine that looked like a gigantic corkscrew. He's spinning around and it pulls. But the question of whether or not you could do that is that's a question maybe for another day. But there's this idea maybe we could do something like that. I've heard he is credited with the idea of the contact lens, and I just imagine him going up to his buddies and saying, if your eyes don't work, we could take a shard of glass and put it on your eyeball. Maybe that would help. I can see them going, yeah, Lenny, that sounds like a great idea. Let's go have another drink. But he was constantly doing those things from an engineering point of view. And then like in his spare time, he was carving stuff. And that was, I'm sorry, and in his spare time, he was painting, and he painted all sorts of awesome things. The Last Supper is the picture, and it has been parodied and mocked, and it's become a Dan Brown book. And I mean, it lives in the history of mankind, way up at the top.
Yeah, I mean, we can talk for days about Leonardo, but I don't find Leonardo that exciting. My favorite Ninja Turtle and my favorite Renaissance painter is Raphael, which is, I think, a fascinating exploration of Renaissance art itself. If you're unaware, Raphael was a famous fresco painter, and fresco is plaster on a wall mixed with paint, and it's a very unique and time-enduring process. And Raphael was able to create those pretty much at will, with just beautiful art and depiction of human spirit and humanity as a whole. His most famous work, The School of Athens, which hangs in one of the Raphael rooms in the Vatican, has been debated by scholars to this day about the essence that it has, specifically related to Plato and Aristotle, who are the center of that piece.
Yeah, so I'm going to go back to the fresco because we say that word and we throw it out, and the idea that you would take you mix up plaster, right? So plaster it's like very, very soft concrete, right? I mean, it sets up. It doesn't necessarily dry. And what you do is you put the plaster on the wall, and then while it's still wet, you add watercolor. So you're working with this porous material that's wet and malleable, and you put watercolor on it. And Zach, I was a couple years ago. Remember when we redid this storeroom here in here? So we have this attic, and it was unheated and unfinished, and so I decided I didn't like storing my stuff out in the attic. So I said, well, let's finish up this room. And Zach helped me one year when he was home on break, put up the drywall, and then after he left, I did the drywall mud. And we had this special drywall mud, Zach, that you would put it on. It was pink, and then as it dried, it would turn white. And I thought to myself, I wonder if I could paint the mud, if I could put food coloring or equivalent, some pigment into the drywall mud, and then I could do frescoes in drywall mud. And I was like, so what I've taken is a project where I'm redoing the School of Athens in a fresco with drywall mud in the storeroom here. So I'll be done in about 15 years, and then you can come and look at it.
I mean, I don't think it's going to be very good, mainly because you're not a very good artist. But you can believe in yourself. Someone has to.
Yeah, I will do something like that. But all right, so he's doing the School of Athens, and we've talked about this a little bit before. And the School of Athens is kind of this representation of the pinnacle of this of the Socrates, Plato, Aristotle school of philosophy as it manifests itself in Western philosophy.
Yeah, I would say it's even beyond the Western philosophy idea. It's the idea of the use of math and geometry and just human endeavors. Alexander the Great is depicted. He's the only Greek warrior garb dressed as everyone else is in academia cloths and clothes. So he's depicted there. There's additionally depictions of Pythagoras and not Aristotle, but Archimedes, who were very big in the movements of early mathematics, specifically with Pythagoras having the Pythagorean theorem, which helps you find like the size of triangles and fun things like that.
Yeah. So, all right. So if you haven't hit pause yet, okay. So hit pause and go to your little interwebby thing, and look up the School of Athens. And it's this monster. Zach, it's a monstrous painting, right?
It's the size of a whole wall.
Right. So at the Vatican, there are these 4 rooms called it's
the Raphael rooms, and each one has a unique name.
Yeah, right. And so there's 4 walls in each of 4 rooms. So there's really 16 paintings here, right? And they weren't all
and the
done.
Stuff that's on the ceiling.
Oh, don't forget the ceiling, right? And the floor is just tile, all right? Who cares, right?
Just tile, but if you've seen Vatican floors, it's a little bit more than that.
Right. So it's this great perspective painting, and at the center of the painting are 2 of our favorite Greek philosophers.
Yeah, at the center, we mentioned this a little bit earlier, is you have Aristotle and you have Plato. Plato is on the left, and he's pointing to the sky, and Aristotle's on his left, the scene's right, and he's pointing at the ground, which is a reference to their philosophical ideologies.
Yeah, so Plato was interested in the perfect form of the good and that kind of thing, and Aristotle said what really matters is how you put that into practice, and so they're each carrying their books of their own philosophies, and and they are in perspective, so they're walking at this hall toward the viewer, but surrounding them are about 35 different people, and they're all fun people from antiquity.
Yeah, they're historians have discussed it as famous Greek and Roman philosophers are scattered throughout this fresco. Additionally, Leonardo da Vinci, who we mentioned earlier, his face and his characteristics are depicted as Plato. So Leonardo kind of represents Plato in the Renaissance movement. Additionally, I mentioned earlier, on the front left side of the screen is Archimedes and Pythagoras discussing and writing down mathematical principles, and above them is Alexander the Great, who I already mentioned.
Yeah, so you got Alexander the Great on the left side of the painting here, and for those of you following along at home, I want to make sure we get this so you can find him. So Alexander's wearing the Greek helmet. He looks like a warrior, but he looks a little effeminate. Zach, you said he's typically shown that way.
Yeah, he is. Historically, that's very, very familiar for Alexander the Great to be shown in that type of way.
Yeah, so he's standing there kind of in the back. At the front of the painting, at the bottom, you see a guy sitting there by a block of stone, and he's writing on that. And that's one of our artist friends, right?
Yeah, that is Michelangelo, who we're going to talk about a little bit later.
Right, okay. And then to the left of him in the painting, there's a guy writing in a gigantic book, a very big book. And that is one of the mathematicians?
Yeah, that is Pythagoras. And then the guy who's holding the chalkboard kind of to his left, a little bit behind in the painting, is Archimedes.
All right, so
diagramming stuff and being a mathematician.
Yeah, so there's Archimedes, and he's got a little chalkboard, and he's just to the right of Pythagoras. And it's interesting, you look at the chalkboard, and you can see he has that, like, he has that water always seeks the same level kind of thing. He's got that on the chalkboard. And if you look carefully underneath that, Zach, you see he has set up the scheme for modern 10-pin bowling right at the bottom of that. So I didn't really realize that Archimedes was credited with inventing the bowling alley, but obviously because it's here in the School of Athens, that's what he did.
Yes. So Raphael, depicting Archimedes in the School of Athens, created bowling as we know it today.
That's exactly right.
Okay.
That could not be wrong. All right. What's on the other side of the painting here?
All right, yeah. So that left side is kind of our mathematicians, and then on the right side we got the geometric inclined people with Euclid, who's kind of bent over. He has a geometric device, and he's also drawing on a chalkboard for students around him.
Right. Okay. So he's got 4 ladies crawling all over him. So he must have been quite the heartthrob. And then the other guys are in the back talking. There's a guy holding the earth and a guy holding the heavens.
So that's Zoroaster and Ptolemy, who we talked about before. And so Zoroaster is wearing white. He kind of has that gray beard, and he's holding the heavens, which is more or less depicted as a ball of air.
It's ball of stars. It looks like, yeah. And then Ptolemy is holding the earth, and
his back is facing us, and he's discussing about the earth to his friend to the right.
Yeah. Wow. And if you want to, you can spend weeks going over everybody's interpretation of who is who in this painting.
Yeah. Additionally, in that Zoroaster Ptolemy group, facing the audience, you can just see his head is Raphael, represented as Apelles, who's another famous person from history. So there's this thing throughout the Renaissance of these painters painting themselves and their friends into their artwork. I mentioned earlier with Michelangelo, and I mentioned earlier with Leonardo da Vinci being represented as Plato.
Yeah, this is an incredible. You can. Okay, here's the understatement of the week. Ready? This is an incredible painting, Zach. But you can spend. I'm a big believer that whenever you show data or show a painting or something like that, you need to reward the viewer for getting close and intimate to whatever you're looking at. So when you get closer and it gets and you don't get any reward for that, then that's not good. This, you get closer every time you get in there, you find something else that's interesting. Even in the building here, this building is represented in classic perspective. On the left side, Zach, there's a big statue, and on the right side, there's a big statue, and those are important as well.
Yeah, so on the left side, above our mathematicians and Alexander the Great, is Apollo, the Greek god, and on the right side, mirroring him, is Athena, the Greek goddess. But uniquely enough, because we're in the Vatican, which is in Rome, Athena is not represented as Athena, and instead she's in her Roman guise as Minerva, which is a very subtle play there. Again, Athena is the goddess of wisdom, if you're unaware of that. So again, the School of Athens wisdom philosophy is represented there. And Apollo, who's the god of light, archery, and music, as well as he's depicted there. So there's these subtle little things that Raphael has hidden across this painting that is just fantastic to look at. And it's a historical masterpiece because it incorporates all these people.
And it is like, this is the wisdom and the power of our age, Zach, is you can zoom in. I'm sitting here just outside of Nashville, Tennessee. All right. And I have up on my big computer screen this painting, and I have zoomed in here, and I can look at not even the painting, but just like the sculpture around the painting of, here's a depiction of a bunch of guys arguing about a sphere. And over here is a battle of some people fighting a sea monster or something like that. And here's some guy hacking the head off a pagan or something. I don't know what he's doing, but there are depictions of all sorts of things. And these little gargoyles, they're like, look at this scary face, man. Here's a skull, and here's a lady who needs to put a shirt on. I mean, there's all sorts of wonderful stuff here in this painting. And then it's got perspective, and it was done in a fresco. And that's just one of 16 paintings in these rooms, plus the ceilings.
Yeah. So this is in the room of the Signatura. And opposite this wall is the Disputation of the Holy Sacrament, which is another very well-known and famous Raphael piece. And then additionally, there are 3 other rooms. The room of Heliodorus, the Room of the Fire in the Borgo, and then the Hall of Constantine, which is the biggest of the four rooms, but less famous of the four rooms because it was painted by Raphael's underlings or assistants, but he was the one that thought of the this is what it's going to look like. And those paintings depict Constantine, the former Roman emperor who converted to Christianity after the Battle of Milvian Bridge. My bad. The battle before the Battle of Milvian Bridge.
Right. So, and those are the paintings, right? I mean, there's the Vision of the Cross where he said, like, so the story is this, and the stories are the stories. And actually, last week we were up in Minneapolis and we were at Holy Cross Church, and there is a depiction there at Holy Cross Church of them standing there, and it's written in Latin, and it says, "By this sign you will conquer." So that's the story. Constantine saw the cross, and he said, "Okay, guess we'll put that on our flags and stuff." And then he beat his opponent there at the Milvian Bridge, and then he got baptized. And that's how Rome became Christian, and that's in one of the rooms there. That's 4 of the 12 of the 16 paintings.
Yeah, and it's a very famous Raphael painting. And Raphael, like I mentioned earlier, was this fantastic fresco painter, and he was able to create these beautiful, magnificent depictions of history and humanity all tied into one, and it's just absolutely fascinating.
And these are just so wonderful in the stories they tell, not only about the history but also about man's understanding of his own history with regard to the events that take place. And so I'm looking here, and the battle is raging down below, but up above the angels, I'm sure that's got to be Michael with the sword, and he's helping drive the battle. But what's interesting to me just now, Zach, is it's very obvious to me that the crown here that Constantine is wearing is almost identical to the crown that Ptolemy was wearing in the painting we just looked at. I mean, it's the same kind of thing. He's got little spikes on the top, but I'm sure if you went through here, you would see lots of famous people depicted
as Roman soldiers, or even Constantine himself.
Yeah. So wow, so Zach. When are we going to Rome?
Whenever the Romans let us fly across the pond there.
Yeah, I guess
get to the Rome.
Yeah, I guess, and I think if you go there, you should take your binoculars, because there's probably a limit to how close you can get to this thing. But this is incredible, wonderful art, and wonderful things to learn. So, okay, that's
Raphael.
Wow, and that's just part of Raphael, right? Those are the things that make him most famous. So, but we got some other turtles.
Yeah, we got Michelangelo, or Mikey. Michelangelo was well known for the Sistine Chapel. He was additionally well known for the marble statue, the Statue of David.
Yeah, so David was the guy in the Old Testament who David and Goliath, and he took the stone and he hit the Goliath in the head and then cut off his head, and then he became king. But there's the statue of David is monstrous, Zach, isn't it?
Yeah, it's like 15 feet tall. It's carved in marble. It's carved in marble, which is hard enough to begin with, and it's just perfect dimensions of a human being. Just the way he's holding the sling, the way he's holding the rocks in his right hand. It's just
so that's the picture, right? So he has his hand up by his head, right, and the sling comes down behind his back. And in his other hand, he's got stones that he's going to put into the, we think of a slingshot. It's often like a Y forked branch with a rubber band. That's not what he had. He had a strap that had a bag at the end, and he'd swing that really fast and smack the bad guy in the head with a rock. So, but David is huge, right? So 17 feet tall, something like that.
Is it 5.7 meters, 5.17 meters, which is 17 feet tall.
Yeah, so it's really big, but the proportions are still right. I mean, it's not like he made it life. If you did life size, you could just say, "Well, I'll just make it this big. I'll look at my nose, and I'll look at his nose, and I'll make them." Everything got scaled, and when you scale in 3 dimensions, it gets really hard to do. And is this a solid piece of marble?
Yeah, that's how they would do. They would start with just a massive piece of marble, and they would chip away at it and carve it out. And if you messed up, well, don't mess up.
Don't mess up. So he carved David, and David is sitting somewhere in. Is David in Rome as well?
David is in Rome. Yeah, he was originally outside of some place, and then he moved to his current location, which is the Gallery dell'Accademia. and he is on display front and center there.
Wow, and that is, I don't care who you are, you just got to tip your hat to that kind of artistry and his ability to do these things. So when he wasn't busy doing David, he was painting the Sistine Chapel, not just the ceiling, but the walls as well. He did the whole
Yeah.
thing, right?
So the Sistine Chapel is probably most famous for the creation of Adam, which is God reaching out and poking Adam with his finger.
Okay, wait. So there's the painting on the ceiling, and God's hand is coming in from the right, and God's reaching down to man, and Adam is kind of like, I'm going to reach up. All right, so he's reaching up with, but his fingers, their fingers don't quite touch, right? They're
Correct.
half an inch apart or something like that, 3/4 of an inch. All right, and they don't quite touch, but that's going to be when God is going to imbue Adam with life, right? He's going to boom, there he is, God, and now Adam has a soul.
Yeah. So that's the centerpiece of the ceiling. But additionally, on the walls, there are two, I would say, mirroring stories. On the southern wall is the stories of Moses. So, Moses leaving Egypt, Moses, crossing the Red Sea, Mount Sinai, all those famous Moses stories we get from the Old Testament. And then on the northern wall is the stories of Jesus and, baptism of Christ, temptations of Christ, all of these famous Jesus stories that we get in the New Testament. And then those two walls come to the eastern wall, and you get the resurrection of Christ mirrored with the disputation over Moses' body. And so those two things come together, all while sitting below the Sistine Chapel, which represents the stories from the book of Genesis.
All right, so we got Genesis on the ceiling, and we have the Old New Testaments on the walls, and then we have like the finales on the other walls. But these are big paintings as well. I mean, the Sistine Chapel is really tall, right? I mean, Adams, this isn't life size. These are really big things, and they're done in frescoes again, right?
Yeah, all of these were done in frescoes, so they take a really long time to do, and they're really, really, really big.
Yeah. So he had to go up on a scaffold and paint these things lying on his back on the ceiling. Is that right?
Yeah, he spent a lot of time painting the Sistine Chapel, lying down on his back, hoping that he had all of his tools ready for the day, because it was a lot harder for them to get up in scaffolding back in the 1500s before they had these automatic scaffolding machines that we have today.
Right, and they don't have the plastic buckets from Lowe's. They don't have the pulleys that we have. They don't have the casters that can roll the scaffold machine around. They don't have the hard hats. There's no OSHA, right? But they did have assistants and stuff, right? So the assistants would mix the paint in the fresco.
They mix the paint. They would help with maybe some finishing touches. They would help with prepping Michelangelo to do his next task the next day. They would do all of these things to help make the task a little less burdensome and time consuming. The Final Judgment, which is another Michelangelo piece in the Vatican, took 5 years. It's a massive wall.
5 years. I have 5 years to do something like that. There are times when I'm ordering dinner at the restaurant where I can't keep my focus on ordering the same thing at the end of talking to the waitress as I am at the beginning, or I changed my mind in that period of time. And he went 5 years. I would just it would be amazing to me what the planning has to look like for that. Do you spend 2 years planning that? How many sketches do you make? How do you? I would love to have a fresco painter. We got a fresco painter out there somewhere. We would love to hear two things. One, how to do frescoes, and can you come here and help us do it? And second of all, can you do frescoes in drywall mud? Is the other thing I really want to know. Because and he was a sculptor as well.
Yeah, I mean, he was he was another one of those Renaissance artists that did a bunch of stuff that has influenced and impacted history and humankind to this day, specifically the fact that there's a Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtle named after him.
Yeah, I don't think in 500 years they're going to have Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles named Zach, Rafe, and Bufnagle.
Bufnagle.
Well, maybe Bufnagle the turtle. So he did the sculpture. He did David, but another one. He's to me the one. If I could have any of these pieces of art, the one I would want would be La Pieta. All right, and that is the one that is the pity. That is Mary holding the dead Christ and weeping over the body, and that means La Pieta means the pity, right? And it is the absolute heartbreak of of a mother for her son, but also mankind for the Godhead.
Yeah, I mean, additionally, Michelangelo was an architect, and the Duomo at St. Peter's Basilica in Rome, that was him as well. But it's fascinating that this guy was a painter, was a marble stone magician, and an architect.
Yeah, and generally, and this is a thing that I heard recently is with La Paeta, he generally didn't put his name on his works, but he did on that one because the story is that he was somebody was touring the church where it originally was held, and they came in there, and the tour guide said, "Oh, this is this great sculpture we have, sculpted by this guy not named Michelangelo." And Michelangelo was there, and he heard him tell these people that, and the people were like, "Oh, that's really nice. Where's the gift shop?" All right, so when they left, he went back to his shop and he got his chisel and he modified his sculpture and added his name on that ribbon. So if you look at it now, you will see that it says essentially by Michelangelo on that sculpture. But it is that to me is, you look at, we've achieved a lot of great stuff. Zach, I've talked about the wonders of the GPS world, and we've talked with America's favorite rocket scientist about going to the moon. The things these guys did with stone and carving tools blows my mind.
Absolutely. And we haven't even talked about probably one of the most impressive Renaissance artists, Donatello, who's our last one. We're going to touch on this briefly. Donatello was early Renaissance. So before all of these guys were doing those great things, he was doing his thing. And he did bronze work, which is very different than marble work. But it's fascinating to look at because it's all this shiny and curvatures. And like Michelangelo, he also did a version of David that now sits in the Bargello in Florence. And it's different than the David that we get by Michelangelo, but it's still ridiculously impressive because of the bronze work. And it was early Renaissance before some of these artists had some of these additional skills figured out.
Yeah, so we looked at when we talked about the School of Athens, how that's in perspective, and you can it looks like that classic Renaissance art, right? Where they kind of taunt you like, look, I can do perspective, and before it became very commonplace to be able to do it, they were like, look what I can do. And so, but Donatello was 1386 to 1466. So that's the early part of the 1400s. These other guys were early 1500s. Or, I'm sorry, they were late 1400s. These other guys were early 1500s. They had other technology. I mean, technology wasn't sitting stagnant all those years. Technology was constantly evolving, and Donatello just happened to be a little bit earlier than these other three guys.
Yeah, I mean, additionally, like Donatello was closer in age to Genghis Khan than Donatello was in the colonies of the United States. Well, the British colonies in the United States from settling. And that can't be said with all of these Renaissance painters that we talked about.
Yeah, so Genghis Khan was in the 12 and 1300s, and so we're going to get to that, Zach, because I've been doing some research on Marco Polo, who's late 1200s, and the impact of Marco Polo and the Khans runs right up to Donatello. So that's a great place for us to I think shoot. Is it time?
Yeah, I think we're running a little long on time today, but we've had a lot of fun talking about this. This is something I've wanted to do for a couple weeks now, so I appreciate all of our listeners for staying with us and learning about the Renaissance and going on this journey with us.
Right. So if you get a chance, pull up your Wikipedia thing, spend the time reading these things. I'll say this. I love to do the research on this, but you know what, guys? You guys got to take the tests. All right. We can't do all the work for you here. So use this as an inducement. Go study, read these things, find out about it. You have the world of information on that phone of yours. It's for more than just sending cat videos. So use it to all it's worth.
Yeah, that sounds like a great plan, Rafe. Again, thank you all for listening. This was so much fun to do. And if you want us to explore similar topics like this in the future, let us know. I am more than willing to talk about history pretty much anytime because I enjoy it on the utmost level. So again, go seek the good, be the good, and spread the good. Enjoy the adventure of life.